There's a part of our brain designed to hold us back. There's a part of our mind built to keep us from growing and making progress. And I call this resistance. And it's this brick wall that we hit anytime we want to do something, but we can't. When our wants grow, so does our resistance. And our resistance growing makes our wants grow even more. And that in turn makes our resistance grow even further. And very quickly, this becomes a feedback loop where now we want this thing really bad
Mm,
and can't have it really bad. I know everyone listening here has had moments where they really, really wanted something and things weren't moving for them. But as soon as they let it go, it began to fall into place.
when you go beyond the surface and into the depths of who you truly are, you will rise. Kam, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited and also very honored to have you here to be in conversation with you, and especially the topic that we're going to dive into today. So first and foremost, thank you. And I would love for you to start off with a little bit about you, but I want to know what's your mission and your purpose right now in this lifetime.
Okay, so I want to say first, thank you for having me on, Ashley. I am really, really happy to be here. And I'll just give a quick brief about who I am. My name is Kam Knight. I'm a mentor, international speaker, and author of a dozen books in the area of mental, physical, and emotional performance. I've had different missions in life. As I was younger and growing up, they were more self focused. But as we do and achieve the things that we want, we come to a certain point where we start thinking about things outside of ourselves. This is usually when we start having kids. And I think we're built to do that. And at a certain point, when we do become self sufficient, we can think of things outside of ourselves. And that's where I'm at. And I would say I've gone from wanting to evolve humanity to heal humanity, because evolve humanity was when I was coming to this concept of internal resistance, which answers a question I had my whole life. Why is it if I want to do something, I know what to do, I know how to do it, and I have the motivation and desire to do it, but for one reason or another, I can't or don't do it. And recently I've been working on this technique that helps people break through their unconscious mind and work on a lot of their challenges, especially from the past, at the unconscious level. And I feel it's probably the fastest and most direct way to get this inner healing that I think we all need and many are actually seeking.
I really love that. Evolve humanity to
Yeah.
heal. I love that. It's such a
Yeah.
even just the energy behind that is such a shift, and I think that is something that a lot of us beat ourselves up over, that follow
Yeah.
through. Again, coming back to, we have the vision, we have the
Yeah.
desire, we have that excitement towards what it is that we are wanting to create, but then we're met
We
with
can't.
these, yeah, we're blocked. And I'm curious, what is really happening beneath the surface when it comes to this resistance? And that's probably very loaded, but wherever you
Yeah.
decide to take us.
Yeah. Yeah. So it'll be actually a good place to start this way. And I'll kind of start by talking about how I even got to this concept. So growing up, I had very strict parents who had a lot of expectations of me, but very little support. And then also growing up, I more or less grew up on television. So I learned that my value was very dependent on the external, having a big car, fast, big house, fast car, prestigious job, a lot in my bank account. And so that added to this desire and drive that I had. And, in high school, I had the desire and drive to do well, be straight A's, get into an Ivy League school. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. I got into a decent college, but I used what's called the backdoor method, where you don't apply to a major that's hard to get into, you apply to a major that's really easy. And then once you get in, you work hard to transfer to that major. And I was actually able to do that. And I did end up graduating from the number one accounting school in the country. I wanted to work for a big five accounting firm. That's what they were at the time. Now it's the big four. And unfortunately, although I got a good job, it wasn't with the big five firm. And then, even in the work world, I had aspirations to start a couple different what you call ventures, and then eventually to write my book. And although was able to start, or I finally got the success I wanted, it was much more difficult and stressful than it needed to be. And I wondered why that was. Like, why is it if I want to do something? And although I know how and have the motivation, I can't. And at the time, there weren't a lot of good answers. The best answers I was coming across was you need to have beliefs or motivation. And those are important keys to a bigger puzzle, but there was more to it. And the more books I read, coaching I did, and seminars I attended, the more I had started learning about the complexities of the human mind. And at a certain point, I was like, hey, wait a minute. There's a part of our brain designed to hold us back. There's a part of our mind built to keep us from growing and making progress. And I call this resistance. And it's this brick wall that we hit anytime we want to do something, but we can't. So, to understand how the process works, what really helps to know is that the part of the brain that creates wants and desires works separately and independent of the part that actually allows us to act on that desire. And this is very important. So I'll say it one more time. The part of the brain that creates wants works separate from the part that allows us to act on the want. So the part that creates wants is in many ways completely unrestrained. It's creating endless wants one after another at a pace faster than anyone can achieve. So even if we live multiple lives, we could barely achieve the wants that our brain is producing in a week or in a month. It's just like its only job is to create wants. It doesn't check to see if we can achieve it. So we have this other part that checks to see if we have the time, energy, resources, or if we should do this thing. And so, what another thing that's important to understand is that it is possible for the brain to both create a desire for something and at the same time keep us from going after it. And for a long time, I used to think whoever created humanity must have been really sick and twisted because how could they do this to us? How could they put these like huge desires, burning desires in us, and then keep us from going after it? It's so painful.
Mhm.
But when you look at it from this perspective, it makes 100% sense. As I mentioned, the wanting mechanism, it was never meant to check to see if you should be able to go after it. Its only purpose is just to create desires, and that's it. And then that desire gets filtered by this other part of the brain, which filters that desire using a whole host of criteria. And how a good way to think about this is to think about standing before a panel of judges or board of directors. So every decision that comes up must go through all of them, and each member must agree to it or it won't pass. And if even one of the members is against it, the brain will put the brakes in your life.
Uh,
And so what I tell people or teach people is that it's actually interesting, but both parts can get in our way. The parts that create want can get in our way, and so can resistance. That's because the wanting mechanism actually creates many challenges, and the resistance has many criteria that we have to go through. And unless we have that worked out, we will face challenges and struggles in moving forward. And so a lot of times it doesn't matter how much we want something, how simple it is to do, or even how much benefit we'll derive. If these two things aren't in a line, we can't act.
wow, I have a million questions coming through. First and
I
foremost,
know, I can imagine.
the first thing that comes to mind is when you're talking about the part of the brain that, and we have to go through that criteria, is that the same for everyone or is it situational? Is it environmental?
It's more or less the same for everyone, and I'll talk about some of the criterias. Some of the more commonly known criterias that you've likely heard and people who listen to podcasts have probably come across relate to beliefs, habits, and comfort zones. So if a person has limiting beliefs about what's possible or what's possible for them, when that desire comes up, it'll filter to that belief, and the belief says, well, this is going to be hard. It's going to be hard for you. You can't do it. So I'm going to put the brakes. And then another criteria has to do with habits. A lot of people don't realize that we are biological machines. We aren't just, these whole conscious thinking beings that can just do whatever we want. We are made up of molecules so small they can't be seen with the naked eye. And so billions of molecules come together to form the cells. Cells form tissues. Tissues combinations form muscles and organs. And muscles and organs form systems like the digestive system or the nervous system. And together that makes us up, makes us us. And so it took years for all the cells, tissues, muscles, organs, and systems to line up the way that we do. And in a way, that's what habits are. All the individual parts of us, down to the very cells, lining up for a certain way, for a certain activity, for a certain way of thinking, acting, or behaving. And that can't be changed easily. All the individual parts of us, down to the very cells, have to shift, rearrange, and realign for the new behavior. And so, although our wanting mechanism can make it seem like, I want this, I should be able to go after it, resistance goes, yes, you should be, but we have to work within the biology of who we are, and it takes time to change. And although we might be able to take some steps in the beginning, then we hit up against habits, and then resistance comes up. So that's another criteria that people kind of talk about. Another one has to do with comfort zones. The brain likes familiarity over something novel. Even if the familiar is painful, it'll pick familiar over something that might move us into a territory that we don't know. And so anytime we do something new, and if it pushes us out of what's called the comfort zone, resistance will arise. And a lot of times people think of comfort zones as comfort, but I don't think of it comfort zones as comfort. I think of it as more familiar. The more familiar we know, the less mental strain it creates to learn something new. And so the more we're going to continue doing it. And if it requires pushing out of that, resistance will arise. So these are some of the more commonly known criteria, but it
Yeah.
goes really deep.
Yeah.
It goes into our self-image, our authority issues, our inner child, family systems, all of these. And so to circle back to your question, is it the same for everyone? It is the same for everyone, but every person is different in each of the criteria.
Right.
Some people have less limiting beliefs. And so when a desire comes up, it doesn't necessarily filter through that one. Like that judge says, yeah, go ahead and do it.
Right.
And their habits are aligned. So they're like, okay, go do it. But then it might hit up against comfort zone. It's like, oh, we're going to try to trudge into an area that we don't know. And we've never been taught how to be comfortable in new things. So I'm going to put the brakes here.
Mm.
Some people might be comfortable, so then they might hit up with self-image, they might hit up with some of these other things. And in my work, I found there's about a good 25 to 30 criterias that come up. And
Wow.
and so it's a lot, which um I do want to say one more thing is we've all seen or know someone who has a really easy time moving through life. They have a desire, they can do it. They want to do something, they can act on it, and they can move forward and they can, do, have, and be more. But then there's other people who can barely do one thing.
Uh-huh.
And the difference comes down to for the person who has a really easy time doing things, when their mind filters a decision or desire, they don't have a lot of resistance. So they can go through it a lot easier. And it seems like it's almost like magic, like they have some gift.
Uh-huh.
When the reality is, it's not that they have something, is that they don't have a lot of what other people have, which is resistance. Now, then you have these other people who have a hard time doing just about anything, even sticking with one thing. It's tough. And that's because they have a lot of resistance. And it comes down, a lot of it, the more resistance we have is really related to our upbringing. If we weren't instilled good beliefs, if we weren't taught good habits, if we were kind of in many ways abandoned, there's an inner child that doesn't want us to grow, but we don't have good family systems and things like that. So they have a lot more work to go
Wow. I'm so fascinated.
through.
And what comes up just in terms of sometimes in therapy or, you go that route, what's coming across is I go back to what you said, the board of directors. And I think it's interesting if you can bring a little playfulness to it when you can start to notice where the resistance is coming up, which I imagine takes
Yeah.
a lot of work, I guess, when you come to understand the different criteria that is showing up. But you can almost
Yeah.
play around with it where, you give each one a name and they're always board of the directors. And you can have this dialogue with that certain member who's bringing up the
Yeah.
resistance.
Yeah. And I think this is actually a really good approach is it helps to understand that there isn't just one person inside of us. There isn't just one Cam and one Ashley. Is it Ashley-Ann or just Ashley?
Either or is good.
Okay, great. There's actually multiple Cams inside me with many different drives and purposes. And sometimes people get stuck because they think it's like I want to do this thing and I can't. And because I can't, there's something wrong with me.
Right.
When it really does help to think of it the way you described it, there's actually multiple Cams inside of me and they're wanting different things. And yes, this one right now is wanting this thing, but there's these other Cams that are wanting something either different or they're designed to maintain some sort of balance or equilibrium that is keeping me from moving forward. So if the part of me that is checking to see if I have the limiting beliefs, its goal is to make sure that I stay in line within my limiting beliefs. And although I might be upset that hey, like I want to do this and I can't, and this part of me is holding me back, it's like, well, that's his job. If it wasn't doing its job, it wouldn't be very good at what it did. And so when we can kind of think about it, oh yeah, there's all these Cams in me, and I can even like have a play and interaction, then we can move forward. In fact, I would even say the playfulness is almost required
Yeah.
because a lot of who we are, we're not as adults and grown up as we think. And a lot of the things that are going on inside of us are very childish. They're like a 7-year-old in us. And so if we can be playful and interact in that way, it can be much more helpful than coming in with that, no, we're gonna do this my way, the highway. And you know how we were as kids when parents tried to do that, we just became resistant. So the play part I do like. I haven't really come across anyone say that, but I do think it's very important.
Yeah. The thing that comes up right now is also just what I think one thing that we hear about often is how the ego is trying to keep us safe. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, what role do these, if any, what role do these play intertwined with our ego and this resistance and keeping us safe? Does it have any correlation?
So ego is a very interesting word. Someone had recently asked me about that, and we can it really helps to define ego
Mm,
first. So, ego was talked about by Sigmund Freud, so one of the godfathers of psychology. And he talked about it, I think, in a very different way than how it is used traditionally in normal conversation, like, oh, this person's an egomaniac. And I think how you may be asking it is differently too,
yeah.
because we're thinking of ego not as being an egomaniac, but just as part of ourselves that wants certain things. We have a different take on it, and I'll throw that out there, and you let me know if this is the direction you wanna go in,
Yeah.
or we can wind back. So when we're doing the inner work, we're in many ways an emotional being. And there's a guy, and so we have hundreds of words to describe emotions. But there's a guy named Paul Ekman who brought up the idea that if you take all the emotions, they can be broken down to like 5 or 6 primary ones. And if you remember the movie Inside Out, there's those five primary emotions: fear, hurt, anger, sadness, joy, and disgust. In fact, Ekman was actually brought on that movie to consult. So it's
Oh,
actually his
I
idea.
didn't know
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah. And so there's disagreement on what the primary emotions are. In that movie, it was actually fear, sadness, anger, hurt, and disgust. Other models I've come across, it says it's fear, hurt, anger, sadness, joy, no disgust. And other models have just fear, hurt, anger, and joy, no sadness. Regardless, if we just take them all, we have 6 primary emotions: fear, hurt, anger, sadness, joy, and disgust. I think ego is the 7th emotion. So the ego actually comes as an emotional response. So when we are in like a very egotistical or high ego state, it's actually an emotion of that. And the ego comes in response to inferiority. So one of Sigmund Freud's proteges, Adler, he came up with the concept of superiority. And he says when there's superiority, there's inferiority. And when you're dealing with superiority, you're dealing with both superior and inferiority at the same time. And so when we have that ego response, it's really, we have insecurity inside. And so the more ego you see, the more insecurity there is. And in many ways, the ego does come to protect.
Yeah.
Because if our insecure self isn't strong enough to defend ourselves or to handle things, it does show up as a response to take care of us in some ways. And in many ways, it could be damaging, but its whole purpose is to be, what's the word? To help us move forward, to help itself move forward. And if we were to take the conversation ego even deeper, I've done a lot of ego work. It may not seem like it, but my ego is out of control. And the way I describe it is I could make Donald Trump seem like a humble guy. That's how out there my ego was. And if there was one area that I have put more effort into, like I've had to do a lot of work to get to this point, but the ego work is the hardest.
Yeah.
And that's because the ego is very elusive. It's very conniving. It shows up in very subtle ways. And the reason I say that is to say I've done a lot of ego work. And I would say all of our egos come down to want. So a want is ego. Even the want for food and water is ego because it's this drive to continue our existence. Yeah. So there's a lot I just said. So to kind of just summarize, yeah, I do think the ego comes up to protect,
Mm-hmm.
and it is part of resistance. And at the same time, it is also a want. In fact, I personally think all of our wants is ego. And the more wants we have, the stronger our ego is. And like I said, even just to have water is ego because it is a drive or desire to push our own life forward.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And I think that's why I was probably going that way too, or why it was coming up. Is we hear so often about our ego trying to protect us. And
Yeah.
that's where it comes up too. But I do want to go back to even earlier, another question that I was thinking of too is with you talking about these two separate sides of the brain that are not working together. Is there a way
Yeah.
that we get them working together?
Yeah, there are challenges to both sides. So, as I mentioned, there's a lot of challenges to wants.
Hmm.
What I found is there's about, I don't know, about a good 8 to 10 challenges our wants creates. One is an overactive want. This is where the brain creates all sorts of desires all of the time. It sees something and it wants it. It hears about something and it wants that too. Oftentimes, it doesn't have to hear or see anything. It pulls us in all sorts of directions.
Hmm.
Before we can start on one want, it's pulling us towards something else to chase. And then we have what's called an overactive want. This is what's often referred to as having a burning desire. Many coaches and experts talk about a burning desire and the importance of having one, but I would disagree. And that's because when our wants grow, so does our resistance. And our resistance growing makes our wants grow even more. And that in turn makes our resistance grow even further. And very quickly, this becomes a feedback loop where now we want this thing really bad and can't have it really bad. And this might not make sense to a lot of people, but I know everyone listening here has had moments where they really, really wanted something and things weren't moving for them. But as soon as they let it go, it began to fall into place. And it comes on to this challenging aspect of wants. Then we have impatient or an immediate want. This is where a person wants things right now, right away, or things aren't moving fast enough. And what I tell people is most people can achieve most anything they want if they can be patient about it. That's because our own impatience becomes a hindrance. And that's because impatience is painful. It's extremely painful. It's so painful that we want to do anything to get rid of it. And because it's the want that's creating the impatience, we want to either get rid of the want, which means we can't have the thing, or we want to have it as fast as possible, where we force things and make things more harder than they need to be. So when I say there's different challenges, I'm not going to go into all of them. I can if you like, but in the interest of time, this is so you and your listeners can understand what I mean when I say our own wants can create challenges.
Hmm.
So we actually have to be to work on our wants, to really figure
Right.
out why we have the want we do. Because, like I said, the brain isn't doing that. It's just creating the wants. And when it creates it, it floods our bodies with these euphoric feelings like, when I have this thing, it'll be so amazing and great, even though things might not change at all. But if we can feel that way, and then now we want this thing. So, to answer your question, how can we get more in line our wants with our resistance? First, we need to actually understand why we have the want we do. Is this thing really going to be fulfilling? And work through the challenges our own wants create. Once we can handle that, it becomes easier to move forward. I say easier because then that want still gets evaluated by resistance using all the criteria. And what's really challenging about resistance is that the human brain is fascinatingly complex. Many, many experts would say it's the pinnacle of complexity in the known universe. More complex, there's stars, planets, and even airplanes. And I would agree. I mean, it is extremely complex. And when you think about how we have millions of psychologists and therapists around the world for decades studying the mind, and we're only scratching the surface at it, gives weight to its complexity. The reason I'm saying that is because no one person can understand all the issues that the brain creates. And that's what makes resistance so challenging, because if you hadn't heard about the concept of inner child or authority issues or family systems, things that I didn't hear about until much later on my journey. In fact, it's not even something you could rationalize or logicalize yourself into figuring out, but
Hmm.
you would have to kind of learn it. And even then, a lot of the information isn't the best. If a person doesn't come to that, it's going to be hard for them to see how that could be playing into why they're struggling.
Mm.
Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
resistance does create some challenges because some of the things are kind of obvious or more common sense because it's talked about more. Like I said, the habits, the comfort zones, and limiting beliefs. But when we go into some of the deeper things, and I haven't even mentioned all of it, a
Hmm.
lot of the things resistance come up is because it's having us avoid something bigger, or it's having us avoid the pain of mistakes, or the defense mechanism, things like that. And so it does pose some challenges.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, the complexity is just is
Yeah.
blowing my mind in a way. I want to. There's something that's sticking out to me as you talk, like mentioned how the brain is not really allowing us to even go beyond just that want, right? And I'm curious,
Yeah.
where do we then take this want comes in? And our brain doesn't really have that capacity to filter through why do I want this and whatnot. So where do we take that? Do we take that to heart center? Where do we go with that?
Well, the first thing is to understand that our brain is creating so many wants, we don't have the time, energy, and resources to achieve them. And like I said, no one person can achieve all the wants that our brain is producing. So
Hmm.
we need to pick and choose our wants.
Right.
And what's really more important to understand is even while we're working on a want, it will create other wants to chase
Yeah.
that will pull us out. And so if we can understand that, we can be more intentional about the wants that we pick.
Right.
We have to say, okay, how much effort is this going to take? Is this want really going to be fulfilling? And do I have examples of it? Because the person can look back in their life and think about the wants that they had that were really, really telling them that they needed it. And did it change their life like the want made it seem? And almost often it doesn't. In fact, the studies show we humans are terrible predictors of how something will make us feel. And it comes down to this wanting mechanism. It can make us feel when we get something, or when we get to a certain place, or when we have something, everything will magically take care of itself and all our problems will go away. And there are so many people who have been chasing this thing that either their wanting mechanism created or someone else planted that want in them, saying, once you get there, your life will be like this. And when they get there, putting years and decades of work, they're just as miserable as they were before. And so it's really important to really be rational with your wants. And then when we are working on the wants, the mechanism will be pulling us. And what's even more difficult is now we're living in a time where We have so many options, and our options have options. And so our challenge isn't what it used to be like 50, 70 years ago, where whatever opportunity there was, you took it because you don't know if it would come along.
Mhm.
Now the opportunities are coming like constantly. I mean, I go to networking events, you go into business space, there's so many opportunities to
Yep.
make money. You flip through social media, everyone is talking about how you could do this and that and whatever. And I'm sure they all work. Is that they don't all work for one person doing it all at the same time. It just
Yes.
can't be that way. Yeah, so that's what we need to do. We do really need to pick one or two wants to work on at a time.
Mm.
And if there are other wants coming up, we have to tell ourselves, we committed to this. We're going to stick with this until we're finished. And then we can evaluate any other want.
Mm.
And sometimes our wants, it's not easy to manage a wanting mechanism, especially for people who have an overactive wanting mechanism.
Right.
So the more active it is, the more wants it's creating, the harder it is to stay focused. Because, like I said, anytime they do something or they're working on something, other wants are pulling them and they're just going from one to the next, not making progress in any.
Mhm.
Now, when you see people who are a lot more focused and on a straight and narrow, it's not because, again, they have some quality. It's that their brain isn't creating all these wants to pull themselves away. So it is easier for them to stay in the straight and narrow. And so for the person who has an overactive wanting mechanism, they have to do a better job of not just telling themselves, hey, I'm already working on something, but to actually cut out as many triggers and stimuli as possible.
Mm.
And I say that because this was a big one for me. Most of my life, I've had an overactive wanting mechanism.
Yeah.
Most anything, my brain was stimulated by all the things to do, which is why I've written over a dozen books, traveled to over 100 countries, and I've done all sorts of activities like scuba diving, skydiving, snowboarding, rock climbing, yoga, dance, and so much more because my brain was stimulated by all the different things that there was to do.
Mhm.
And I realized personally, if I wanted to accomplish anything in life, I had to get a handle on this mechanism. And what I realized for me was to really manage the triggers and stimuli. And for me, that meant cutting out television, social media, YouTube, internet articles. I even went as far as to cut out personal development
Mm.
because just reading personal development would like stimulate me of all the possibilities. And oftentimes for me, the wants were actually really overpowering. They would make me forget what I was working on or I would lose interest in them.
Yeah.
And I know this is a bit extreme, but this is, I do believe for a person with an overactive wanting mechanism, this may not just be the best solution, but the only solution. And a person has to decide for themselves how far they're willing to go to get the results they want. And what I have found is the people who have the success that we're wanting, if you actually look at their story, they did whatever it took for themselves to get the result that they want. And the rest of us are looking at what others are doing and they're like, well, I don't want to give that up.
Mhm.
And if you don't want to, well, then you're going to get the results that you want. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think I relate. Do you feel like we go through phases? Do you feel there's periods and times in our lives where it is more overactive and then maybe at other times that it's a little quieter? I feel like that's why I'm resonating is I see those moments where my brain is overactive and it's almost you're just
Yeah.
outsourcing too.
Yeah.
We have the gift. We have the gift and also the challenge that comes with social media. I don't like to say that it's a curse.
Yeah.
I don't believe that, but I think there's challenges. And that
Yeah.
challenge is, seeing what everybody is up to. And then you
Yeah.
start kind of being inspired by those other wants and
Yeah.
desires. And they're not even necessarily yours, right? And I think this is
Yeah.
why I feel so important that we're having this conversation to bring this conversation to
Yeah.
those that listen, because this is really challenging to
Yeah.
have this dialogue with ourselves, have this relationship with ourselves, to set boundaries, to cut things off. But it's so powerful, right?
Yeah.
When I think for me, for the last like couple of years, that was such a big thing of just, I'm not going to outsource my power anymore. I'm not going to
Yeah.
seek outside of myself for answers. You know, I'm going to turn everything inward and I'm going to
Yeah.
create that relationship. And in that, that's where you discover so much about yourself. You actually really discover the wants that you truly, deeply
Yeah.
desire.
Truly a desire.
Exactly. And that you actually want to pursue that are going to be really fulfilling. And you cut out the noise.
Yeah. So a lot to unpack there. First, I'm going to take us back. So when we look at, religion and scriptures,
Mm-hmm.
like the 12 commandments or the seven deadly sins, at the most basic fundamental level, they're actually trying to help humans tame their wanting mechanism. Thou
Interesting.
shalt not steal, thou shalt not do all this stuff, because that is the natural inclination of the wanting mechanism is to do these things. And when we look at the seven deadly sins, like, gluttony and greed, that's just the wanting mechanism. The wanting mechanisms wants more and more. And these scriptures, or even from back in the day, a lot of what they were teaching us was, in many ways, to control this wanting mechanism. This is what makes humanity and coming together as a society so difficult, because this part of us is so unrestrained and it's never fulfilled. In fact, I'll go as far as to say, imagine, like everyone listening here, close your eyes and imagine everything that you want right now, like all the things that you wish you had, that your brain is saying your life would be great. Whether it's that relationship, that car, that house, the money, graduating, all of that. Now imagine having all of that. No, once you have it, you'll still want more.
Mm,
And that's the challenging part of the wanting mechanism, that it always wants more. And it'll convince us once we have this thing, our life will be perfect and all will
yeah.
be grand and I could be settled. But literally, once you have it, you might get that feeling of satisfaction for a short moment, but then I'll want another thing and another thing. In fact, this is one of the reasons I do believe that people cheat when they're already in a relationship, is because the wanting mechanism sees another person, attraction gets triggered, and if we're not aware of it, we can go in that direction.
Mm,
And the other thing you had said is, like, when we're scrolling through social media, we're seeing, or even in real life, we're seeing so many people doing so many different things. But the brain isn't realizing that all those people aren't doing everything. It's each individual is doing one thing. And we're seeing one person do something and we want what they have. We see another person doing something and we want what they have. And
yeah.
we see one person, another person. And so now we have dozens of wants from a dozen people, and we don't realize it's that those dozen people are just doing that one thing, which is why they have that success. And so if we can take a step back and realize, oh wow, like, even though it seems like everyone is doing everything, they're really not. It's impossible. No one can do it. And even if you hire other people to gain the success you want, you're not getting the joy that you would in doing it yourself. So those are some of the challenges.
The thing that I'm thinking of
Yeah.
right now is I've always said awareness is power. And I
Yeah.
I, I think I speak for myself in this moment too, of just everything that you have shared has given, I feel so empowered to now be able to
Yeah.
learn this information, to see this and to have it explained in
Yeah.
the way that you've explained it. Because yeah, that really just blew my mind. The piece around like scrolling and you see everyone, you're like, I want to do this in my business. I want to do this in my
I
business. And
wanna
you're
do
like,
that.
you can't do all those things.
Yeah, and then you hear some person development person going, "You can do anything. You have unlimited potential." So then you think you can do all that stuff, and you start, and you barely make any progress in any, and then we start feeling, like, guilty and bad because we're not moving forward, and it just becomes a really vicious cycle. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for the conversation. And I'm also
Yeah.
curious too for those that are tuning in and listening to this, where is a good place in terms of a resource or where they
Yeah.
can dive into more of this and learn more? I don't know if it's one of the books that you've written.
So unfortunately, no one's really talking about
Yeah.
this. And I had to kind of learn it on my own through my own experiences and develop my own ways of managing and controlling both the wanting mechanism as well as pushing past resistance. So I do have a course called Conquer Internal Resistance to Achieve Your Next Goal. And it's a deep dive into this topic. it talks about all the challenging aspects of our wants, as well as provides over a dozen criteria that the brain goes through. But more importantly, it discusses a concept which I call tricks of resistance. So when the brain is going to hold us back, it doesn't tell us that it's holding us back.
Right.
Instead, it uses manipulative tricks, and it has all sorts of tricks up its sleeve to keep us from taking action. And I'm going to share a really powerful story to help people understand what I mean by tricks. And then I'll share a few more tricks so people can see how the tricks operate. But no, there are dozens and dozens of tricks the brain uses. And my course goes into that as well. I mean, I'm just going to take a quick moment to plug that in. They could get information on the course at kamknight.com. So, when I was in South Africa, I heard a woman speak about her journey of addiction. She described a pattern that she fell into that many addicts fall into. And she said many addicts know what they're doing is wrong. When they're searching for the next hit, a part of them knows that they should stop, though there's a deceptive trick that keeps them perpetually stuck in their addiction. And that they say, after the next hit, I'll stop. After the next one, I'll stop. I just need to do one more, and after I'll stop. And when they say it, they're convinced, absolutely convinced. In their mind, they truly believe after the next one, they'll stop. But here's the thing, they keep saying it and do it. They do it for months and years. And I bring this up because I know you, Ashley, and all your listeners are doing this in some area of your lives. A desire comes up, and in that moment, a thought surfaces that says, I'll do it later. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it this weekend. I'll do it next week. I'll do it next month, or I'll do it next time. And when we say it, we're convinced we'll do it later or tomorrow. But when the next arrives, you push it off to the next and next and next until two things happen. One, we're married, have two kids, a stressful job, and as a result, no more time, or we completely forget the goal. And be very careful anytime you hear yourself say later or next, because it's likely a trick your brain is playing to push off you doing the thing. Otherwise, you actually would have done it later or next time. And so, this is what I mean by the tricks. Our brain is very sly. So, when it says, hey, Ashley, this thing that you're trying to do, it goes against our beliefs. So, I can't let you do it. That's not how resistance works. When resistance says, nope, you can't do this, it has these tricks. Some of the more common tricks are things that like television, social
Hmm.
media, doom scrolling, video games, drinking, alcohol, drugs.
Yeah.
I say they're common because that's what a lot of people fall into, and
Hmm.
they're very obvious too because when we're doing a lot of these things, we know deep down we should be doing something else. But some of the tricks are very conniving, and they're so conniving we wouldn't think of them as tricks, which is why they work so well and why we so easily fall for them. And for example of a trick is planning. A lot of people who want to start something or do something, they get into like this heightened sense of planning, having the perfect plan of what they're going to
Yep.
do, how they're going to do, who they're going to talk to. And once a plan is done, they're not
Nothing.
acting on the plan. Yeah, they don't feel ready enough, so they plan even more. Another way trick manifests is overwhelm. Let
Uh,
me ask you, Ashley, have you ever done something that seemed really hard and difficult, but once you actually did it, you're like, that wasn't so bad?
100%.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that happens because the brain made it so difficult you didn't even want to think about it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes just thinking about it makes us exhausted. And because we are exhausted, we don't do it. And because we don't do it, resistance wins. We have
Yeah.
pushed off the activity. Another way trick manifests is what I call superiority. I don't know if you've done this, but I do this. I had done this a lot. Because anytime someone gives you an advice or suggestion, you're like, nah, I don't need that. I got this.
Mm,
We feel too superior and better for it. Well, as soon as we feel too good for it, we don't take the advice or the suggestion, or we don't do the thing. And because we don't do it, resistance wins again.
mhm.
And so, this is what I mean how clever our tricks are, because in all these instances, you wouldn't think that you're being tricked by your brain, but it's all the tricks. So, That's a really important concept to know, and I go into that as well
I love
in
that.
that course.
I love it so much because I'm also thinking going back to the play, it's, being able to call yourself out in a loving way as well when you notice
Yeah,
the tricks happening, when you
yeah,
notice yourself doom scrolling or mindlessly watching TV. It's, you know, I don't, I think my biggest thing is not to shame yourself, not to judge yourself when that happens.
yeah,
That's not going to be helpful. That is going to make an even worse spiral happen. But if you can bring the playfulness back into it and, laugh it off in the sense of
yeah,
just, this is what's happening.
yeah,
Again, I go back to the awareness being power it's such a
yeah.
crucial thing.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not the route I took. I went the whole shame and judging and
For
route.
sure.
And although it was helpful because I was able to be aware of the trick,
Of
I
course.
think taking that playful route is going to be great. It's be like, I know what you're doing there, little Cam,
Yeah,
and I'm not going to fall for it. And if you
exactly.
play with it, it's gonna be like, oh, and then it's more likely not to come up later,
Hmm.
or if it does, it's so you and your inner self can have this fun banter and stuff like that. So I do like that twist to it. And I'm glad that you're bringing it. But these things, I don't want to say but, and these things
Hmm.
are really important because you've heard the phrase that you are your own worst enemy.
Hmm.
Well, now we know why,
Yeah.
because resistance is the enemy within that is creating the challenge is why people say you are your own worst enemy. And it's easy to assume that just because we want something, we'll take the necessary steps to get it. But little do any of us realize our own self is going to throw rocks and hurdles on our path. And a lot of them aren't even going to seem like they're rocks and hurdles. They're actually going to seem like the path that we should be going down when it's really just detours and challenges and struggles.
Yeah, I love that. As I was telling you, I'd love to kind of close our conversation in a fun way too. I think one thing that
Yeah.
I've discovered just in my own journey is, I really look at inner work boiling down to these three things. And I look at it as us needing to have this like curiosity when these triggers come up, when these things are happening and we're, for example, on the basis of our conversation, the resistance is happening, like being super curious to see what's really happening so that you can do the work to move through. I don't want to say overcome, but move through that resistance, whatever it is. I think courage is a really big important part of this inner work. You need to have the courage to face probably some difficult truths. I know as I'm
Yeah.
listening to our conversation, I'm sitting in it and I'm like, ooh, there's lots to unpack for myself here. And I think the last part, and it goes, I guess, into the playfulness, is compassion. I think compassion is such a big part when you are learning something new, and it can feel so confronting to
Yeah.
be in this space and to understand and bring this awareness. It's really important for us to have compassion for ourselves because we didn't know better. Who's in this conversation that we've had,
Yeah.
who's talking about this angle of resistance and our wants and desires? And
Yeah.
I've never heard this conversation anywhere. So it's having compassion that we're learning something new and we're doing something, we get to choose to do something different. So the first thing I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you is, what question about yourself or life are you exploring right now?
Well, I want to riff on a couple of things you're saying, and then I'll answer that question because it'll really lead into it. It's extremely important to be willing to look at yourself and inward.
Mm,
Unfortunately, it's extremely hard
yeah.
because when we look inward and we realize, oh, wow, this thing that I thought I was doing because I was being kind and generous was really for self motivated and self interested need. Or this thing that I am doing was really just an excuse to prolong this other thing that I'm avoiding. And there's a lot of it. And anytime we realize that, oh, we were doing something quote and unquote wrong, it doesn't feel good. And depending on someone's upbringing, the emotions that come up, it can be really, really unpleasant and difficult to sit with. And you described a couple of them, things like shame and self beat up and things, and even like self hate can come up just by looking inward. And so that in of itself makes it hard. But I will say, having looked inward, is yes, those really tough to sit with feelings do come up. But when we can work through it, then that's how we break through the layer of resistance. And we don't have this part that is manipulating us having that hold on us anymore. So it really is a really important to look inward. I also want to say that to help kind of shortcut the process, just come from a perspective that we humans are very self-centered and self-motivated and self-interest beings. When we're scrolling through social media and watching movies, there's so much message of about being good, kind, and generous, where and a lot of these influencers and celebrities are pushing this message how good and great they are,
Mhm.
so people can know, like, and trust them. And then when we see these people doing that, we start to act that way as well, and that actually covers up a lot of ourselves that are holding us back. And so if we can just come from the perspective from the get-go, hey, we are operating in self-interest, even if we're trying to do something that's helpful for others, we can more quickly and easily dive into the inner parts of ourselves and work through the resistance. That's huge. And know that a lot of the shames and guilts and regrets and some of the more difficult feelings to sit with, it can feel like we're the only ones feeling it. And that's what I felt like a long time, because that's what that feeling makes us seem like. Oh, you're the only one who did this. No one else is not doing this, and no one else has it. And I have hundreds of clients that I've worked through, and we all have it, and some more worse than you can imagine. So I want to shortcut that because it can take a long time to realize. So, as I mentioned, I talk about a concept called internal resistance. And I've been really in this for the last 5 years, but now I've developed a method that helps people go into their unconscious to work on their resistance at the unconscious level.
Mm,
So I call it the Kam Knight method, and this is really what I'm moving forward with.
I love that.
Meaning, this is the next step that is kind of the uncomfortable territory that I'm moving into.
That's exciting. I That's exciting. I'm excited to see it unfold for you too and to witness that. So the next question I
Yeah.
want to ask you is what's one risk or brave choice that you've made recently that has shifted everything or just made a shift in your world?
What's one brave choice that I have made
Yeah.
that has shifted everything? I don't know. I think, you know what it has been recently is, for a long time, I didn't have as much confidence. I think what I'm talking about, people have really resonated with. I think it's something we're all struggling with, and not a lot of people are talking about it. But I've kind of played it small. I haven't really put myself in the bigger rooms. And recently, I've been putting myself in bigger rooms. So that's how I met Les Brown recently, legendary speaker. Really enjoyed hearing him speak, and I could see why he's done so well. I have put my rooms at, a lot of other people. And what's really great about putting yourself in rooms with bigger people is you realize that they're just human. Like, literally, when you actually, like, you could see them on stage, you could see them on social media, and they seem larger than life.
Right.
And unconsciously, there's this disconnect that this person is this or there, and I can't ever be there. But when you're standing next to them, some of them are, like, shorter than you, some of them are,
Yeah.
uh, and and they're just human, and if you just pay attention, they have quirks and nuances, and which are signs of their own fears and insecurities, and you're like, "Oh, wow, a human can get to this level, so I am human. I can get to another level too." So that's what's, really been really helpful, is putting myself in bigger rooms.
I love that. I mean, even just from our conversation, I'm like, good. That's the word that comes. I'm proud of you for putting yourself in these rooms because I can see why this conversation is really landing and resonating because
Yeah.
we all experience it. Surprise. We're all experiencing
Yeah.
this resistance and we all have wants.
And it seems like they do have it figured out. There's nothing that they could want from you, but because they are human, just wanting a conversation, they're built for. And if you can get up to them and just have a normal conversation where you're not like a groupie trying to get their attention, like, they want that, they need that, they're
Hmm.
built for that. They can't not have that. So it is important to see it that way.
Where in your life are you learning to give yourself more grace?
So I've been someone who hasn't.
Mm,
I have, as I mentioned, I kind of alluded to it. I took the route of going more towards the self beat up and shame route. And it's interesting because when I was in that, I told myself, once I get to this level, I'll be at a good place. And every time I got to the next level, my part that wasn't giving myself grace or compassion was like, you haven't done enough. You have to you have to do the next thing. So before I could really even bask in the satisfaction of the hard work that I put in, my mind was off to the next. Got to the next, same thing. The part of me that didn't have the compassion and grace was off to the next and next. And this is a very important thing that I want people to really hone in on. If we're not giving ourselves compassion and grace, this is what's going to happen. As soon as we get to the place where we think we can be happy or things will finally be at a place where we can relax, we actually won't be able to because we haven't trained that muscle to be able to enjoy and bask in the satisfaction. So I think compassion and grace are huge. And that is something I am working. It's more of a work in progress for me.
for
Let's say that.
sure. Yeah, I feel like we're
Yeah.
all work in progresses in this area because
Yeah.
like we said earlier, we're our own worst enemy. And I feel that shame and that judgment comes up for a lot of us and we beat ourselves up and when we can, at least for me, I think it's bringing the lovingness and the playfulness is what allows space for us having more grace and compassion for myself.
Yeah. In fact, if I could add one more thing, I would say what we're seeking in doing the grind, putting the effort that we are, really trying to push through and all of that is compassion and grace. I think that's what we're
Mm,
ultimately seeking.
yeah,
And we think it's going to come when we get to the finish line or do complete those things that our selves are saying we need to before we can feel those things. When in reality, we have it available to us.
mm,
And I know it's not always easy because it wasn't easy for me. I've heard the concept of captioning and grace, and I was like, yeah, whatever. I need to do this. And once I get there, I'll get the compassion and grace. But really, we have to start giving it to ourselves, and sooner than better. Because, like I said, we could hit, we could, we could jump over those hurdles and finish the cross line, and not receive what we thought we should, and then the brain just create another hurdle or another finish line for us to chase.
I love that so much. Giving ourselves compassion and grace and just what comes up for me is like kind of final thoughts is like how that brings a little bit more ease to the journey as like the pursuit, I guess, right? The pursuit to whatever it is that you're working towards brings more joy into it, into the entire
Yeah,
process. Um,
yeah, yeah.
this has been such an incredible conversation, Cam. Like I'm so grateful. There's so much for me. I'm so looking forward to going back and re-listening and to also just I'll leave all the links below for all your different resources so that those that are tuning in and are also very curious to dive in further can do so. And I'm
Yeah,
so grateful. Thank you.
yeah. Yeah, so I'll just wrap up really quickly. If people want to get any of my books on mental performance, they go as deep into the topic of internal resistance, and I highly recommend them. And they can get that at kamknight.com, KAMKNIGHT.com. My course, Conquer Internal Resistance to Achieve Your Next Goal, can be found on the website as well. And then now I'm doing one-on-one work where with my method that I develop, I can take people into their unconscious and we work on the resistance that they have that's specific to them. And it's a much more accelerated process. And if they want to reach out to get more information, they can email me at mentor, mentor, at kamknight.com.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that. Thank you for being
Yeah.
here, for you sharing your story and your journey and your experiences and everything you've learned and all the,
Uh,
I acknowledge too that all the decisions you've made in your lifetime have led us to this moment. And I don't take that for granted,
uh,
so I honor that and I'm so grateful. So thank you for being here so much.
Yeah, thank you. It helps release some of my shame and guilt for some of the choices I've made.
Exactly. I love that. Amazing. To those that have tuned in, thank you for being here. I know has been such an incredible, deep episode, which I absolutely love. And, just if it resonates and if it lands, share it with those that you feel might also really enjoy this conversation. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in another episode.